Okay, okay. Mabait na tayo, ah. Mabait na tayo. In fairness, may extensive discussion sa mga iba't issue, no? Lalong-lalo na yung foreign policy. Of course, favorite natin. 3 hours yata daw yung debate sa foreign policy. Hindi pa rin tapos, eh. Kasi andyan si Ma'am Carlos. Disclosure, dati kong prof yan. Meron pa siyang pahabol, may mga tanong-tanong. So, let me say a couple of things, no? The first thing I want to say is this. Okay, of course, talagang want to sawa, talagang alam na natin. Talagang make the most out of your time. Gets na natin yan. But at the same time, I very much appreciate that for the first time sa tingin ko, candidates have been, I won't say grilled, but a little bit pressure to more clarify yung kanilang stance sa some very contentious issues, whether ito yung quadrilateral security dialogue. So you don't just say quad, you kind of say first quadrilateral security dialogue, also known as quad. Pinag-usapan din yung ating alyansa sa Amerika, or actually not much. Pinag-usapan yung Russia, strategic partnership with Russia, yung West Philippine Sea. And ito dito talagang very interesting. Pinag-usapan talaga yung issue ng NPA. At saka yung ugat ng rebellion, ng talagang yung gulo sa kung saan-saan sa Pilipinas, sa mga peripheries ng ating bansa. So doon nakikita natin na buti andyan si Ka-LEODY. Otherwise, baka na lang, magtatolits na lang tayo dyan, na pare-parehong mag-echo chamber tayo dyan. So buti nga andyan si Ka-LEODY because he was able to provide an alternative perspective, dito sa ugat ng problema sa rebellion, na instead of just red tagging or just demonizing the rebels, although of course meron tayong batas on the issue of rebellion and all of that, we also have to understand anong talaga yung ugat ng problema. Uy, andyan pa ba kayo? Parang wala na yata kayo. Tulog na yata kayo, Wow, walang star, Wala na. Yung mga nagbibigay ng star, nasaan na kayo? Tulog na. Ayan na. So yun, I mean, the first thing is, in fairness, I think for the first time in our history, I could say, or at least in contemporary history, we have this extensive discussion on very contentious issue at meron tayong alternative voice. And in this case, it was Ka-LEODY. So I'm very, very glad na si Ka-LEODY ay talaga dumaan sa debate na yan, despite all concerns about whether there's going to be an objective approach to this, whether this is going to meet the basic standards on objectivity and professionalism and all of that. Of course, I'm not here to pass a judgment, but alam niyo na yung background, At kung gusto niyo malaman more about it, well, tingnan yung, parang na-tweet yata ni Lacson about that, di ba? Kasi kung, para naman yung boss ng media na nag-host ng isang debate ay nag-endorse na already to a candidate, and then at the same time, hindi ka pumunta dun sa isang journalist at yung debate na isa dahil sabi mo bias sila, parang, okay, connect the dots. So, for me, the first thing is, despite the fact na parang nasaan na tayo, anong round na tayo, ilang oras na tayo, at least there was an opportunity. Ayan naman, nagbibigay ng star iba, bait nyo Hindi ako nagparinig, biro lang kung andyan pa kayo. Anyways, balik tayo dito. No, for me, at least for the first time, we had this opportunity for alternative voices to be heard. And not 2 minutes na pa-cute lang, hindi yung 5 minutes na zingers lang. But actually, ilang oras na pinag-usapan yung mga contentious issue. But especially itong issue ng communist rebellion at saka yung gulo. I mean, this rebellion has been going on for almost half a century. So we have to understand anong ugat ng problema ito. Kasi tapos na yung Cold War, hindi na sila sinusuportahan ng Soviet Union or Maoist China. Tapos na And yet, this continues. So we have to understand that. So in fairness kay Ka-LEODY, he held his line and, fearlessly na-express niya yung alternative perspective that I think should be heard dito sa ating mainstream discussion. So in a way, thanks to SMNI debate, there was an opportunity for certain alternative voices to be heard. Now, let's go to the second part, which is on foreign policy. And this is where things get a little bit strange. Now, first of all, I'm glad that we had at least 2 panelists, hindi lang si Dr. Carlos, who actually pushed the candidates to be more forthcoming and more detailed at hindi lang magbigay ng pakit na answers pagdating sa many contentious issues. Paano tayo mag-position sa iba't ibang alyansa around the world? How do we deal with Russia? Hindi na mention na, by the way, there is a sanction on Russia's arms exports. So, kung bibili tayo ng arms exports from Russia, we could be sanctioned. That has been an issue for India, by the way. And that has been an issue for Indonesia. Kaya Indonesia recently canceled yung initial plan nila to get Su-35 fighters from Russia. Kaya nga, they settled for Rafale fighters from France and F-15 fighters from the US. But anyways, I'm not here to give a lecture Unlike some people, I'm not here to give a lecture on foreign policy and all. Although, of course, I would have appreciated if some of the panelists just didn't throw out words there. They explain it, they frame it properly, they explain it properly, and make sure your premise is correct. By the way, the Quad is not a military alliance. It is not moving in that direction. For anyone who's familiar with the countries involved, their strategic doctrine, the debate around that, hindi po collective security ang hinahanap. In fact, once one of my editors used the word Asian NATO for Quad, and there was a lot of backlash against that from some of our American friends and some of our other friends around the world. Because clearly, it is not a NATO. It does not operate by collective security doctrine which governs the NATO. So minsan may mga tanong dyan na yung tanong mismo ay based on questionable premise or hindi properly framed. Or yung tanong na ang Pilipinas ay pinakamahinang military sa ASEAN. Ano? No, of course not. Excuse me. Mas mahina tayo sa Laos, sa Cambodia. Myanmar, in fairness sa Myanmar, may submarine yata sila. But, I mean, come on, let's not exaggerate things and let's keep track with latest developments. By the way, ang Pilipinas, meron na tayo mga bagong mga warships. Meron tayong FA-50 fighters from Korea. We're on the verge of finalizing, hopefully, a deal for either F-15 fighters or SAP fighters from Sweden. So, marami pong nangyari developments. Things since President Aquino in 2012 pushed for revised AFP Modernization Act at tinuloy ni Pangulong Duterte yan. So, in fairness, certain things were happening. So, yun lang, feeling ko lang, parang some of the questions could have been better framed and the premise was quite questionable in some of the questions. So wag tayo masyadong, yun lang. Sana medyo i-brush up yan. Kailangan i-brush up yun. But going back to that, this is where things got a little bit strange for me because dito nakikita natin na BBM actually sounds far more tough dun sa West Philippine Sea, China. In fact, ni-raise ni BBM yung possibility na mag-deploy tayo ng mga naval warships dyan sa West Philippine Sea as a backup doon sa ating mga mangingisda kung hinaras sila ng China. And BBM also made it clear na he will not compromise on a single inch of our territory. That is not the kind of language you have been hearing from him in previous discussions, in previous debates, whether with Tito Boy, whether with Tony Talks, I don't know, well, I didn't really watch that time, whether with whether dun sa mga public forum na mga ginawa niya last year, we didn't hear that. In fact, BBM was seen largely as just a continuation of President Duterte, almost a replica. But here we see that in fairness, BBM made it very clear na anong dapat natin gawin. I'm not saying that's what he's gonna do. Ibang usapan yan. Alam mo na mga politiko, they're gonna say stuff. But at least he made it clear that he is aware that the broader Filipino public wants us to take a tougher stance. That for me is an important development. And the fact that he's doing it with such a huge lead even in the surveys shows that even if he were to become the next president, he's going to show a certain degree of let's say sensitivity and sensibility pagdating sa yung ating mga pangangailangan sa foreign policy front. So hindi tayo pwede maging tatay style na ay wala tayong magagawa diyan, ay love China, ganun. Hindi pwede yan. You have to be a little bit more calibrated in your assertiveness and also not overexcited with your engagement and not expect that bilateral diplomacy alone will deliver. So that was very interesting because suddenly Bongbong Marcos is sounding far more tough dito sa West Philippine Sea issue at foreign policy issue. Now, I don't know what went on there, but clearly I'm sure there are people in his team who realize that we have to be a little bit tougher on this issue because all other candidates are taking much tougher stance. Kaya dito sana if there was a kind of a proper forum for all of the candidates to be there. Because I'm sure kung andun sila Lenny, ay, na-mention ka na Lenny, biglang may mga nagre-react na. Ayan. Yan tayo eh. Oh, ayan. Lenny, ayan. Kung andun si Lenny, andun si Isko, andun si Pacquiao, then I think it would have been much more interesting. Sana lang hindi nag-endorse ng candidate yung may-ari ng ibang media dyan, di ba? Wala na tayong problema ngayon, di ba? But hopefully in the future, sana nga sa COMELEC Commission debates, di ba? Doon natin makikita talaga sino talaga ang palaban, sino ang hindi palaban, sinong gusto lang friendship sa China, sinong gustong, pangunahin at saka i-prioritize yung ating national interest. Yun nga, yun ang kulang. At dito, medyo I have a different take on Ka-LEODY because may mga times na parang, Ka-LEODY, ano yun? Parang, you're blaming US for what's happening in the South China Sea and all. That's so 20th century, right? Nasa 21st century na po tayo. So, all due respect po to Ka-LEODY and all. What I'm hearing are like, outdated, slogans here, which are not applicable to the 21st century, right? And yung sinasabi na non-aligned po ang Ukraine. Kaya nga ginaganyan lang siya ng Russia eh. If Ukraine had a treaty alliance with the US or the NATO, were it a member of NATO, or where it had even something close to what Taiwan has with the US, it would not have been in desperate situation it is today. Yun nga yung tragedy ng Ukraine, eh, di ba? In an effort to become non-aligned at walang away, they expose themselves, right, to a more aggressive superpower. So yun ang gusto mong mangyari sa Pilipinas. So, and then yung mga usapan ng ASEAN, no? In fairness, BBM may mga code of conduct na siya, di ba? Yun ang minensyon ko last time. Parang saan na yung code of conduct? Saan yung ano? And then, yung parang, yung tipong gawin natin a cooperation, eco-friendly zone. Of course, no one saying no to that. I don't know about China, but all of us want that. But the thing is this, anong leverage mo? Ba't ka pakinggan ng China? Kung wala kang armas, wala kang kapasidad, wala kang... Kaya nga, di ba, I'll give you two ways to frame this as easily as possible. One, the Roman saying, right? If you want peace, prepare for war. What does it mean? Kung malakas ka, hindi ka bubuliin ng ibang tao. Pero kung mahina ka, you're inviting aggression. By being weak, you actually invite aggression and you invite war. But if you're strong, you have deterrence, so you keep the peace. Right? And I'll give you another one. Theodore Roosevelt, sabi niya, speak softly, but carry a big stick. Now, of course, wala tayong malaking stick, but what we can be at least a poison tree, right? Ala Lee Kuan Yew. Or we can be a porcupine, right? Yung porcupine strategy ng, for instance, Taiwan or Vietnam. Hindi natin matatapatan yung mga malalaking bansa. But if we have the minimum deterrence capability, they'll think twice before bullying us, right? Or provoking war because there'll be a cost for them. At yun ang mga medyo hindi ko narinig. So, despite the efforts of some panelists to kind of level up the discussion, the framing of their questions also kind of, parang medyo okay. Anyways, mabait na ako. Okay. So this is where I'm a little bit disappointed, to be honest, with one of the, because, kasi you're sure kung andun si Pacquiao, ang sasabihin niya talaga, di tayo takot sa China, palaban tayo. And if Lenny is there, she's gonna say, let's leverage our alliances, let's leverage our arbitration award, let's put pressure on China so that may bargaining chip tayo when we deal with China, right? ISCO, I can sense a very similar stance, especially in terms of yung palakasin natin yung ating defensive capabilities and our alliance with the US, etc., so that we can engage with China on better terms. No one is against engagement, but you have to do engagement on terms that you can make sure na papakinggan ka ng kabila, di ba? Na hindi ka lang i-echepwera lang, di ba? So kung bilateral dialogue ka lang at wala kang, di ba? Wala kang bargaining chip, wala kang leverage. Wala. This is actually, you're just there to sign a submission, di ba? Acquiescence or you know what I'm saying? Appeasement, essentially, deal. And that's not what we want, right? We want something else. So dito, this is where Ka-LEODY was not the opposition, by attacking US and just saying that, daan na lang natin yan sa dialogue and all of that, without really explaining to us how on earth would China even take us seriously, right? Or how is ASEAN per se really that reliable in dealing with China? I mean, ASEAN is useful, but only to a limited degree. That doesn't mean they're useless, but that doesn't mean that ASEAN alone can help us, right? Or dialogue alone can do it, right? Kaya nga, balik tayo dun sa Roman saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. Because only from a position of strength can you secure peace on just terms. Yan dapat ang thinking ng mga candidates natin. Yung mga candidates dyan na hindi sumipot, yung mga alam ko yung iba nakikinig sa atin Yan. Yung mga Roman saying na yan, nakunin yan. Next time, I'll say the Latin term, okay? Basta if you want peace, prepare for war, right? And as Theodore Roosevelt said, speak softly, gently. Diplomacy is necessary, but you have to have deterrence. You have to carry still a stick behind, para papakinggan ka, So, yun ang medyo hindi ko narinig sa mga candidates. So, may mga ibang candidates yan, parang hindi yata alam yung isa, yung Quad. At ma'am naman, paki-explain yung Quad. It's quadrilateral security dialogue. It's actually, okay, anyways, I'm not gonna go there. You can just Google about it, right? Ano bang last na sasabihin ko? Tapos na ba? Anong round na? Tagal na! Hindi pa ito tapos. Basta hintay ko hanggang 10, kasi ang schedule 6 to 10, di ba? So fair ako, Yun nga may mga ibang comments dyan na sana mas tinutukan yung issue ng post-pandemic recovery and then yung sa issue ng corruption, parang awkward. Yung iba parang one-liner na lang yung sagot sa corruption. Parang, and to think that that's a very serious issue. At may imagine mo kung si Pacquiao nandun, Lahat ng tanong, ang sagot niya, corruption ang problema. Bakit mahina yung ating senator ang lakas? Dahil may corruption. Bakit tayo mahirap? Dahil may corruption. You can imagine, Pacquiao were there. Talaga yun ang babalikan yung issue, yung corruption. So, yun lang. Para sa akin, sayang because in a way, hindi naman 3 hours, 4 hours discussion ang sinasabi ko na kailangan. But a 1 to 2 hour extensive discussion with the panelists kind of doing a follow-up, a little bit challenging the candidates. I like that. So, kudos to Ma'am Carlos, right? Despite my concerns about some for shaky assumptions and not proper framing of some of the questions, I think she did a very good job of a little bit doing a follow-up and making sure the candidates don't get away with cliche, no? Yung mga kung ano-ano lang dyan ang mga pakit na sagot. So that was good. So hopefully in future discussions na ganun ang gagawin natin. And I can say this year actually parang mas masaya pa yung mga debates and discussion kaysa last year. Ironically, despite the fact na meron tayong pandemic. And I want to see more and more of that. And yes, I didn't see much of Senator Bongbong Marcos in other alam natin bakit, diba? But at least dito, I got to hear more of his take on foreign policy issue. And I think this time, he was far more prepared. Makikita mo talaga na mas prepared talaga siya dito. And he progressively became more and more, he became more and more confident, right? Dun sa kanya mga sagot and all. Ayun na, dyan pa ba kayo? Wala na, tulog na yata eh. Oy, dumaming stars natin ah. Yun palang dapat gawin ko, magparinig ako kasi kanina parang wala eh. Musta kayo dyan? Ayun na, matulog na tayo. Wag na tayo mag-shoutout masyado. Ano na tayo? Shout in. Para matulog na tayo. O ano, nagustuhan niyo yung format? Ano round na? Tapos na ba? Yun lang, I think, yun nga, I can understand bakit yung foreign policy naging malaking issue bigla. Of course, because of Prof. Carlos. And then there was another panelist who kept on also raising foreign policy, which is good. And you know, for me, of course, bias ko yan, in a sense, sinabi ko bias. Bias ko yung foreign policy in a sense that feeling ko talaga yun yung underappreciated issue sa ating politika, which is completely normal in any democracy, right? But dahil nga sa West Philippines yan, yung nangyari ngayon sa ating karagatan, dun sa ating rehiyon, I think we really have to talk more about it. So, in fairness, what I can say is from my perspective, masaya ako na mas pinag-usapan yung issue ng foreign policy. At the same time, I must say na Ka-LEODY yung mga foreign policy sagot niya. Para mas tough pa yung isa sa West Philippines and China issue, which is like, And this is where sayang na wala yung iba. Because I'm sure Isko, Lenny, Pacquiao would have given a far more, I won't say strident, but uncompromising stance pagdating sa West Philippines issue. Actually, marami kong gustong sabihin, pero sa totoo lang, sabaw na ako. Dapat sana may notes ako. Never mind na. Anyway, salamat. Buti pa, andyan pa ba kayo? May tanong ba kayo dyan? May tanong kayo dyan? Diplomacy is always the answer, but diplomacy only works if you carry a big stick. Yeah, again, speak softly, but carry a stick. Maybe not as big, but at least carry a stick, right? Just in case the handshake goes wrong, meron kang backup, right? Huwag kang pumunta sa giyera kung sila may barrel at ikaw may ballpen ka lang or something, right? Hindi po biro ang foreign policy. Lalong-lalo na pag pinag-usapan dito yung tapos may moment of disagreement pa. Kasi si Prof. Carl sabi niya, this is about fishing. I have a paper on fishing. Ganon, sense and paper. Tapos sabi ni Bongbong, I disagree. This is not only about fishing. This is about matter of territorial disputes. In fairness, talagang may ganon na. Yeah, and I agree. Actually, nagsulat tayo ng mga libro dyan. Pagdating sa West Philippines, actually, it's a confluence of many, many factors, right? Meron tayong competition over resources, meron tayong territorial and maritime competition, meron tayong geopolitical competition between US and China, meron din tayong aspect ng popular nationalism, at meron din tayong mga sabog ng gobyerno dyan na kung sino-sino ang gumagawa ng kung ano-ano, including militias from certain countries going there to rid bank and sinking our fishing vessel, no? So, all of these factors, unfortunately, are going together. Kaya medyo explosive yung situation dyan sa West Philippines. Pero may moment ng ganun, di ba? I don't want to say more kasi may gusto ko sabihin pero wag na eh. Basta, pula on pula yung debate tonight. Kaya okay naman, medyo iba. At mukhang si BBM had, okay, talagang nakapag-practice na siya. He can express himself. you can see the confidence and all. And nakita natin he brushed up talaga his answers pagdating sa West Philippine Sea and all. So I can imagine if ever he really joins a debate in the future, a real debate, no, na talagang there's a professional distance, everything is neutral, etc. Then I can imagine him actually handling it not as bad as his critics would expect him to. So in fairness, and kay Ka-LEODY, I think he was really brave for taking this on and talagang mag-provide ng alternatives. Okay, ito pala ang huling gusto kong sabihin. In fairness kay Ka-LEODY, ni-raise din niya yung issue ng yung negative impact ng mga neoliberal na economic reforms, yung privatization, over-privatization, over-trade liberalization. Ito yung mga academic discussions sa progressive left circles. At least ngayon, na-expose ang mamamayan Pilipino sa mga ganitong issue. So para sa akin, it's a plus. It's an elevation in the level of public discussion. So kudos to you, Ka-LEODY. So yes, medyo hindi ako masyadong sold dun sa sa mga love peace sa foreign policy natin, but definitely a brave inspired performance pagdating sa at least explaining yung kailangan natin intindihin pagdating sa yung ugat ng problema ng mga rebellion sa ating bansa at saka also yung ugat ng ating economic troubles, yung mga wrong trade and industrial policy sa ilalim ng mga neoliberal na regime. Di ba? Parang aktivista ng natin, baka ma-red tag tayo dyan. Pero itong pula debate was very interesting. Yung back and forth and all of that. So hopefully we can have better and better versions of this. So nakikita natin, may Tito Boy version, may Jessica version, meron SMNI version. So I think it gives more and more ideas for... and then of course, meron yung CNN Philippines and ABS-CBN version. So in fairness, we're seeing different formats, and in different formats, we're seeing candidates, at least most of the candidates, right? Getting a chance to explain their side. So more of this. So maraming salamat. Medyo gabi na, promise. Nakikita yung pagod ba talaga ako. Kumain na kayo dyan. Wag masyadong mag-YouTube dyan. Magpahinga na kayo. And hopefully, I'll catch up with you guys soon on other issues. Including, of course, yung sitwasyon ngayon sa Europe. Pag-usapan din natin yan. God forbid na something will happen there. I'm cautiously optimistic a war can be avoided. And very crucial yung meeting today ni Chancellor Scholz and Putin. I think it's today, no? Nakapunta na siya sa Ukraine. So let's see. And there's some indications that Russia may have pulled out some of his troops dun sa borders, northern borders. Pero yung joint military exercise with Belarus are still continuing. At by February 20, malalaman natin saan talaga pupunta ito. Kasi matatapos yung Olympics, so hindi magagalit si Xi Jinping kay Putin kung manggulo siya sa Europe. Kasi mawalan siya ng, diba, medyo, still my thunder. And also, of course, ending yung Belarusian-Russian exercises yung, I think, February 20. So in very few days, we're gonna have a better understanding of where this is going. It could end up in a very horrific situation, God forbid. But we're hoping that, especially with Chancellor Scholz and some of the last-minute maneuvers of some allies, we can prevent a war and conflict, because this is just crazy. This is just crazy. I mean, this is 21st century, and the way this issues being addressed is parang nasa 18th, 19th century tayo, no? At dito talaga, ito talagang cautionary tale. You know, Ukraine, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they became independent. They used to have nuclear weapons. They gave that up, but they were not part of NATO and all, and now they're totally exposed, right? The US and all cannot help them fully because they're not an ally. They're not a treaty ally. They're not a NATO member. And Russia is not very happy with Ukraine because Ukraine is increasingly Western-oriented. So now there's really a threat of invasion and all, and hopefully it will recede. But, you know, this crisis is not going to go away anytime soon. Let's just hope na hindi magkaroon ng giyera ngayon. Okay, alright. Maraming salamat. Let's hope for the best, and good luck. And at least, nagkaroon tayo ng mahaba-habang debate. Kahit, you know, of course, there's always a way to improve things, but at least we saw something different. So, iba naman yan. So, in its own ways, it's fresh. So, kudos to organizers of SMNI, kudos to the panelists, Ma'am Carlos, pasan din ang paper sa akin ha, yung fisheries and all, pag-usapan po natin. And thanks to Ka-LEODY, to other candidates, everyone, for taking this on and giving us a very extensive discussion of very, I mean, pagod na yung mga iba mag-aalamanan na talagang pagod na iba sabaw na Alright, okay,